Sorry, I had to turn out the light behind me. It was a little bit of a glare. Okay, I'm going to be reading all of the chapters that are left to read in the novel, and then we will be done this week, and we will start focusing on writing the book review for history class. And so today, you need to go ahead and turn in your novel to page 160 for the chapter entitled Migrants. The question for that chapter is, when did the migrants promise that they would come back? So a couple of quick reminders before we get into the reading. 1, make sure that you're answering your questions in the form of a complete sentence. 2, make sure that you're beginning your sentences with something other than pronoun. 3, make sure that you're providing a citation at the end of the sentence that you've used to answer your question. 4, make sure that every 5th chapter you stop and make an entry in your summary for your book review template. And again, if you're using the updated schedule, it will advise you as to when you should be stopping to make those entries. Okay, so make sure you're looking at that pink handout. That will be a reminder to you of when you need to stop and make entries in your summary template. Okay, on page 160, migrants. Looking again for when did the migrants promise that they would come back? Oh, and also make sure that you're matching your questions up with one of the subtopic identifiers on your sheet so that you know where to put it in your paper. Okay, remember when I talk about the subtopic sheet, I'm talking about this with the letters and all the subtopics on it. Okay, make sure you're getting those letters in the margins. Okay. We'll be back when the rain comes, they say, pulling away with all they own, straining the springs of their motor cars. Don't forget us. And so they go, fleeing the blowing dust, fleeing the fields of brown-tipped wheat, barely ankle-high and sparse as the hair on a dog's belly. We'll be back, they say, pulling away from Texas, Arkansas, where they can rent a farm, pull in enough cash, maybe start again. We'll be back when it rains, they say, setting out with their bed springs and mattresses, their cook stoves and dishes, their kitchen tables and their milk goats tied to their running boards in rickety cages, setting out for California, where even though they say they'll come back, they just might stay if what I hear about that place is true. Don't forget us, they say, but there are so many leaving. How can I remember them all? Okay, as per usual, go ahead and hit pause here. Answer your question. Make sure you put your subtopic identifier in the margin next to the number. Make sure you include a citation at the end of your answer, that your answer is in a complete sentence with a word other than a pronoun at the beginning. And when you're done, go ahead and hit play for the next chapter. The next chapter begins on page 162. And this is a lengthier chapter. It's entitled Blankets of Black. Again, you're going to go ahead and flip to the next page, 162. And your question for that chapter is, where did the narrator and her father seek shelter from the storm in the chapter entitled Blankets of Black? Okay, on page 162. On the first clear day, we staggered out of our caves of dust into the sunlight, turning our faces to the big blue sky. On the second clear day, we believed the worst was over at last. We flocked outside, traded in town, going to stores and coming out only to find the air still clear and gentle, grateful for each easy breath. On the third clear day, summer came in April, and the churches opened their arms to all comers, and all comers came. After church, folks headed for picnics and car trips. No one could stay inside. My father and I argued about the funeral of Grandma Lucas, who truly was no relation, but we ended up going anyway, driving down the road in a procession to Texoma. 6 miles out of town, the air turned cold. Birds beat their wings everywhere you looked, whole flocks dropping out of the sky and crowding on fence posts. I was sulking in the truck beside my father when heaven's shadow crept across the plains, a black cloud, big and silent as Montana, boiling on the horizon and barreling toward us. More birds tumbled from the sky, frantically keeping ahead of the dust. We watched as the storm swallowed the light. The sky turned from blue to black. Night descended in an instant, and the dust was on us. The wind screamed. The blowing dirt ran so thick I couldn't see the brim of my hat as we plunged from the truck, fleeing. The dust swarmed like it had never swarmed before. My father groped for my hand, pulled me away from the truck. We ran, a blind pitching toward the shelter of a small house, almost invisible, our hands tight together, running toward the ghostly door and pounding on it with desperation. A woman opened her home to us, all of us, not just me and my father, but the entire funeral procession. And one after another, we tumbled inside, gasping, our lungs burning for want of air. All the lamps were lit against the dark. The house, dazed by dust, gazed weakly out. The walls shook in the howling wind. We helped tack up sheets on the windows and doors to keep the dust down. Cars and trucks, unable to go on, their ignitions shorted out by the static electricity, opened up and let out more passengers who stumbled for shelter. One family came in clutched together, their pa divining the path with a long wooden rod. If it hadn't been for the company, this storm would have broken us completely, broken us more thoroughly than the plow had broken the Oklahoma sod, more thoroughly than my burns had broken the ease of my hands. But for the sake of the crowd and the hospitality of the home that sheltered us, we held on and waited, sitting or standing, breathing through wet cloths as the fog of dust filled the room and settled slowly over us. When it let up a bit, some went on to bury Grandma Lucas. But my father and I, we cleaned the thick layer of grime off the truck, pulled out of the procession, and headed on home, creeping slowly along the dust-mounded road. When we got back, we found the barn half covered in dunes. I couldn't tell which rise of dust was Ma and Franklin's grave. The front door hung open, blown in by the wind. Dust lay 2 feet deep in ripply waves across the parlor floor. Dust blanketed the cook stove, the icebox, the kitchen chairs, everything deep in dust, and the piano buried in dust. When I gathered to shovel, my father went out to the barn. He came back, and when I asked, he said the animals weren't good, and the tractor was dusted out. And I said, "It's a wonder the truck got us home." I should have held my tongue. When he tried starting the truck again, it wouldn't turn over. Okay, you might want to put a big star by this chapter on your study guide because it's got a lot of information that will be useful for your book review for history class. Although the question is, where did they shelter during the storm? I would, when you're writing your paper, maybe make reference to what they found when they got back from the storm, how there were so many feet of dust in their house and they had to shovel their house out and the animals weren't good and the tractor was ruined by dust and then their truck had been ruined by dust. Those were all good details that would do well in your paper. So go ahead and stop there. And you're going to want to go ahead and answer your question. Make sure that you put a subtopic identifier in the margin. And when you're done with that chapter, you're going to go ahead and turn to page 172 for Help from Uncle Sam. Okay, on page 172 is the chapter entitled Help from Uncle Sam. And the question that you'll be answering for this chapter is, what did the lady from Farah tell Daddy about taking a government loan that convinced Daddy to apply for the loan? Okay, so taking a look on page 172. The government is lending us money to keep the farm going, money to buy seed, feed loans for our cow, for our mule, for the chicken still alive and the hog, as well as a little bit of feed for us. My father was worried about paying back because of what Ma had said, but Mrs. Love, the lady from Farah, assured him that he didn't need to pay a single cent until the crops came in. And if the crops never came, then he would never pay a thing. So my father said, okay, anything to keep going. He put the paperwork on the shelf besides Ma's poetry book and the invitation from Aunt Ellis. He just keeps that invitation from her glowering down at me from the shelf above the piano. Okay, go ahead and stop there and answer question number 38. And after you've answered the question for Help from Uncle Sam, you're going to go ahead and turn to page 176 for the chapter entitled Hope. And your question for that chapter is, what was the source of hope in the chapter entitled Hope? Okay. It started out as snow. Oh, big flakes floating softly and catching on my sweater, lacy on the edges of my sleeves. Snow covered the dust, softened the fences, soothed the parched lips of the land. And then it changed halfway between snow and rain, sleet glazing the earth, until at last it slipped into rain, light as mist. It was the kindest kind of rain that fell, soft and then a little heavier, helping along what had already fallen into the hard pan earth until it rained steady as a good friend who walks beside you, not getting in your way, staying with you through a hard time. And because the rain came so patient and slow at first and built up strength as the earth remembered how to yield, instead of washing off, the water slid in into the dying ground and softened its stubborn pride and eased it back toward life. And then, just when we thought it would end, after 3 such gentle days, the rain came slamming down, tons of it, soaking into the ready earth to the primed and greedy earth and soaking deep. It kept coming, thunder booming, lightning, kicking, dancing from the heavens down to the prairie. And my father dancing with it, dancing outside in the drenching night with the gutters racing and the earth puddled and pleased, with my father's near finished pond filling. When the rain stopped, my father splashed out to the barn and spent 2 days and 2 nights cleaning dust out of his tractor until he got it running again. In the dark, headlights shining, he idled toward the freshened fields, certain the grass would grow again, certain the weeds would grow again, and certain the wheat would grow again too. Okay, go ahead and stop there and answer question number 39. What was the source of hope in the chapter entitled Hope? Once you've answered that question, you're going to go ahead and turn to page 181 for the chapter entitled Hope Smothered. Now, please note it with this chapter, it says in your schedule, stop and add a sentence to the summary section of your book review pre-writing template. So after you finish answering the question for Hope Smothered, you're going to want to go ahead and go into your writing template and add another sentence to your summary section. Okay. So your question for Hope Smothered is why was the narrator ineligible for the CCC? And if you'll remember from the history book, that is the Conservation Corps. And this is something that you're going to want to remember in terms of government assistance, because it was something that was created by the government to give people jobs during the Great Depression. Okay, so again, think about that when you're matching it up with one of your subtopics on your list. Okay, on page 181, Hope Smothered. When I washed up dinner dishes in the pan, the wind came from the west, bringing dust. I'd just stripped all the gum tape from the windows. Now I've got dust all over the clean dishes. I can hardly make myself get started cleaning again. Mrs. Love is taking applications for boys to do CCC work. Any boy between 18 and 28 can join. I'm too young and the wrong sex, but what I wouldn't give to be working for the CCC, somewhere far from here and out of the dust. Okay, go ahead and stop there and answer question number 39. Why was the narrator ineligible for the CCC? And then stay paused and go into your book review writing template and add a sentence to your summary section. Now, as I'm looking at this schedule, I've noticed that there's a little bit of a error in terms of the dates. Just keep plugging along, knowing that I'm going to be collecting the study guides for the last time on Friday. So you basically have to have the entire book done, and you have to have all of your questions done by the end of the class period on Friday, because I will be looking those over the weekend. Again, I will not be collecting the study guides on Monday next week. I'll be collecting them on Friday. And so I can grade them over the weekend, and we can review on Monday, and we can take the test on Tuesday. So just be aware of that. Even though I see that it jumps around a little bit in terms of the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, what you really need to be aware of is you need to be done with all the chapters and done with all the questions by the end of the class period on Friday. Friday is your catch-up day. Okay. And remember, we have an early dismiss on the 31st, so we will not have a full class period. Okay, so going into the next question, you're going to be flipping to page 195. So that's quite a jump. And we are going to be reading Midnight Truth. And your question for Midnight Truth is, what decision does the narrator make in the chapter entitled Midnight Truth? What decision does the narrator make in the chapter entitled Midnight Truth? Okay, so on page 195. I am so filled with bitterness. It comes from the dust. It comes from the silence of my father. It comes from the absence of Ma. I could have loved her better. She could have loved me too. But she's rock and dust and wind now. She's carved stone. She's holding my stone brother. I have given my father so many chances to understand, to reach out, to love me. He once did. I remember his smile, his easy talk. Now there's nothing easy between us. Sometimes he takes notice of me, like coming after me in the dust, but mostly I'm invisible. Mostly I'm alone. My father's digging his own grave. He calls it a pond, but I know what he's up to. He's rotting away like his father, ready to leave me behind in the dust. Well, I'm leaving first. Okay, so go ahead and stop there and answer question number 40. Okay, on to, and don't forget to be putting your subtopic identifiers here, okay, so that you know what you want to match this up with when you use them in your paper. So now we're going to be taking a look at number 41. What mode of transportation does the narrator take to transport herself out of the dust? Okay, so on page 197, out of the dust. This is not a dream. There's no comfort in dreams. I try to contain the ache as I leave my bed. I try to still my heart as I slip from my room with my kerchief of dimes, moving slowly down the stairs. I cross through the kitchen taking only some biscuits and leave my father's house. It's the middle of the night and I hear every sound inside me, outside me. I go knowing that I'll die if I stay, that I'm slowly, surely smothering. I walk through the calm night under the stars. I walk to where the train stops long enough for a long-legged girl to latch on. And as my heart races, I feel the earth tremble beneath me, and then the sound of sharp knives metal against metal as the train pulls up to the station. Once I might have headed east to Mr. Roosevelt. Now I slip under cover of darkness inside a boxcar and let the train carry me west out of the dust. Okay, stop there and answer question number 41. Okay, your next chapter is entitled Gone West. It begins on page 199. And your question for that chapter is, what does the narrator see several of as she is traveling west? So as she's looking out at the landscape as she is passing by on the train, what does she see? Okay, on page 199, Gone West. I am stiff and sore. In 2 endless days on this train, I have burned in the desert, shivered in the mountains. I have seen the camps of Dust Bowl migrants along the tracks. There was one girl. I saw her through the slat in the boxcar. She stared up at the passing train. She stood by the tracks watching, and I knew her. Okay, stop there and answer question number 42, Gone West. The next chapter is entitled Something Lost, Something Gained, and that begins on page 200. The question for that chapter is, what decision does the narrator make in the chapter entitled Something Lost, Something Gained? Okay, so picking up on page 200, Something Lost, Something Gained. He climbs into my car. He's dirty and he has a sour smell. His eyes are ringed by the soil that comes from riding trains. But there's a deeper shadow to those eyes, like ashes, like death. He needs a hair comb and a shave and a mending needle applied to his pants. He speaks to me. Where are you from, miss? He wants to know. He shows me a picture of his family, a wife, 3 boys. The photograph is all he carries. That and the shredding stain clothes on his back. I feed him 2 of the stale biscuits I've been hoarding and save the rest. I'll be hungry tonight, what with the giving my day's biscuits away. But I can see the gaunt of hunger in his cheeks. He asks if I have water, and I shake my head, my tongue thick with thirst. He eats the biscuits. He doesn't care if they're caked with dust. He finishes eating and crumbs stick to his mustache. He's staring hard at me and his eyes water. I've done it again, he says, taken food from a child. I show him my cloth bag with more biscuits. At home, he said, I couldn't feed them, couldn't stand the baby always crying, and my wife always that dark look following me. I couldn't take it no more. Lost our land. They tractored us out, so we's had to leave. Rented a while, then moved in with Lucille's kin. Couldn't make nothing grow. I nodded. I know. We talked as the train rocked, as the cars creaked, as the miles showed nothing but empty space. We talked through the pink of the setting sun and into the dark. I told him about Ma dying. I told him about my father and how the thing that scared us both the most was being left alone. And now I'd gone and left him. I told him about the piano and Arlie Wanderdale and how I wasn't certain of the date, but I thought it might be my birthday. But he was sleeping by then, I think. He was like tumbleweed. Ma had been tumbleweed too, holding on for as long as she could, then blowing away on the wind. My father was more like the sod, steady, silent, and deep, holding on to life with reserves underneath to sustain him, and me and anyone else who came near. My father stayed rooted, even with my tests and my temper, even with the double sorrow of his grief and my own. He had kept a home until I broke it. When I woke, the man was gone, and so were my biscuits. But under my hat, I found the photograph of his family, the wife and 3 boys. Maybe the photograph was left in trade for the biscuits. Maybe it was a birthday gift, the one thing he had left to give. The children in the picture were clean and serious, looking out with a certain longing. The baby had his eyes. On the back of the photograph, in pencil, was the address of his family in Moline, Kansas. First chance, I'd send the picture back and let his wife know he was still alive. I got off the train in Flagstaff, Arizona. A lady from a government agency saw me. She gave me water and food. I called Mr. Hardley from her office and asked him to let my father know I was coming home. Okay, go ahead and stop there and answer question number 43. What decision does the narrator make in the chapter entitled Something Lost, Something Gained? Now, the subtopic of this chapter is not necessarily related to the question. You might want to think about migrants for this chapter. You might want to think about hardships experienced on a daily basis by people in the Dust Bowl. You might also want to think about teenage runaways because at this point, essentially, Billy Joe is a teenage runaway. All 3 of those would be acceptable subtopics for this chapter. And after you finish that, we will go on to our last chapter, Homeward Bound. Okay, on page 204 is the chapter entitled Homeward Bound. Again, this is our last chapter. The question for this chapter is, what does the narrator realize about running away from home in the chapter entitled Homeward Bound? Getting away, it wasn't any better, just different and lonely. Lonelier than the wind, emptier than the sky, more silent than the dust, piled in drifts between me and my father. Okay, go ahead and stop there and answer question number 44. Once you have finished the questions, Mrs. Beals and I will be working with each of you independently, just as we did with the movie review, toward moving on to the next steps of the paper. Okay, so again, go ahead and turn your study guides in once you get them done, even if it's before the due date of Friday, and we'll start working on moving you ahead in the schedule. Or you also will have the opportunity to work on your history notebook if you would prefer, while you wait for everybody else to catch up with you. Okay? That is all. And don't forget to stop and go in and do your last summary sentence in the summary section of your book review template.